everybody, I'm here with a little video about the astrology of what's going on in the United States right now. So if you're new here, welcome. I'm Lou. I talk about witchcraft, astrology, tarot. I also talk a little bit about art and creativity and music as well on my channel. And if you're returning, welcome back. I'm glad to see you here. So I'm going to talk about the astrology about what's going on in the United States. So if you're not into politics, you don't want to see a political video, that's fine. You can tune away now. It's okay. But I am going to talk a little bit about politics because it's just completely unavoidable at this point. And I think, if you followed me here, you know where my values are, right? So just to be clear about things, I believe we're all equal, whether we're male or female, whatever ethnic background is, if you're gay or straight, however you define yourself, like we're all equal human beings, deserving of, love and respect and basic human rights. I believe that everybody, should have education and healthcare. Everybody should have a place to live and food and water and clean air. And apparently, it's according to some people, that makes me some kind of radical, but whatever. But that's what I believe in. I believe wherever you live in the world, whoever you are, I think people deserve all those things. I think that we should have a basic right to those things. I also believe in things like freedom of speech, right? I mean, to the point of like hate. I don't believe in hate speech, right? Like, there's a point. But generally speaking, you should have freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I believe in like democratic values, those kind of things. I believe in the rule of law applies equally to everyone, no matter what your status is in the world. I don't believe anyone should be a billionaire. I believe that the gap between the rich and the poor has gotten far too wide. Nobody needs that kind of money in the world as an individual. I don't believe in those things. So just so we're out of the way, that's where I stand. I believe everybody should learn to live in security and peace as well, wherever they are in the world. Believe in things like freedom of religion, as long as you're not imposing it on other people. Do whatever you're going to do, right? So those are my general basic beliefs. Again, I feel like that makes me these days some kind of weird radical, but I thought that was the goal. I thought that we were all working towards, but apparently not. So this is where we are, right? So just so you're aware, I am in Canada, and we're watching from Canada what's going on in the States, and I don't know how much you pay attention to the news, but the orange dictator in office right now in the States has been threatening our country, saying, he's going to annex it, referring to it as the 51st state, disrespecting the prime minister, calling him a governor, like all these kind of things. And let me tell you, Canadians are not happy about it. It's kind of like we've had Americans back in like various wars. We helped out during 9/11. We took like all these planes in, we took people in. During the LA wildfires, we sent like water bombers, like everything, which we're very happy to do, right? Your friend's in trouble, your next door neighbor's in trouble, you go help them. Like that's what you do, right? And I want to make it clear as well, we don't hate Americans. We don't hate Americans. We hate what's going on with the government right now. We don't hate Americans. We love you guys. And we're actually like, I know most people, at least people I talk to, we're very, very worried about you. We're very concerned. We're very worried. And we don't want that stuff to spread here as well. And so having like these threats of annexation and stuff have been very, very troubling, very, very worrying. It's very concerning watching all of this go on, watching, the wholesale destruction of like government agencies and things like, the CDC and like the weather agency that like warns people about like hurricanes being dismantled. This is like people's safety, the FDA not telling people about like E. coli outbreaks and things. And then you have, people in charge of healthcare that don't know anything about healthcare that are telling people, we have an outbreak of like measles going on, and we have children dying over a completely preventable disease. We have the government saying they're going to log national parks. These things are all super troubling. I could go on. There's like, the dismantling of the public education system, talking about cutting Social Security and Medicaid to people that so many people rely on and need. And then of course you have all the very frightening stuff going on with immigration. So you have like ICE taking people away just without warrants, not identifying themselves, just grabbing people with no due process. And everybody, no matter their status, is entitled to due process. And sending them to like El Salvador, which is like this concentration camp, this death camp, so frightening, so scary, and imprisoning people because they don't believe, like these protesters at universities, these student protesters. I don't care if I don't believe, like I don't agree with a protester. They have the right to do that. Like that's what free speech is. You don't get to say it's only for people that you agree with. That's not free speech. That's not the way it works. And so they're very, very scary. And then, of course, we have stories as well about people, Canadians being detained, because they didn't fill the paperwork out properly when they're crossing the border. There was one woman where she was like in an immigration prison for like 12 days, which she knows is short compared to what was going on to a lot of other people there. Just because their paperwork wasn't filled out right. Like usually they just deport you or send you home, right? But we have these really scary things going on. And I know that's just the tip of the iceberg. I could go on and on about the frightening things that are going on right now. But I wanted to talk about, all that aside, what's going on with the astrology? Because I think that the astrology is kind of like the weather. The astrology tells us here's where the energy is. Here's the weather. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the astrology of the United States and what is happening. And I'm hoping, whether you live in the States or not, that this can arm you with some idea of where the energies are going and what is happening right now. And there is some scary stuff in here. There is some, a little bit of not so good stuff, but it's not all doom and gloom, I have to tell you. There is hope. So I want to keep that hope alive for you guys because it is there. So we're going to talk about this in a couple of ways. We're going to talk about, first of all, Pluto. We're going to talk about Neptune. We're going to talk about Uranus, and we're also going to talk a little bit about Saturn. These are 4 outer planets. They're very slow moving. So Pluto takes about 248 years to go around the zodiac. So very slow moving, and he's in a sign anywhere from, it can be 12 to 20 years. So it ranges because it's an elliptical orbit rather than circular. Then we have Neptune. So Neptune takes 165 years to go all the way around the zodiac, takes about 14 years to go through a sign. We have Uranus that takes 84 years to go around the zodiac, spends about 8 years in a sign. And all 3 of these planets are changing signs this year or have changed signs this year. And so they often rule sort of the collective energy, and all 3 of them are changing. So it shows that the energy this year is shifting quite a bit. We're also going to talk about Saturn. Saturn changes signs about every 2.5 to 3 years. So it's got a 28-year cycle, which, is not quite as long. But what's happening is Saturn's going to be meeting up with Neptune, and that only happens every 36 years. So I want to talk about that. And like I said, I'm going to talk about this in the context of the history of the United States. So Pluto, last year, and we're still going through it because Pluto moves very slowly. This is not an exact day thing. It takes time. Pluto, is, last year he was back at the point, and the year before as well, of where Pluto was when the American Revolution happened. And so there is this idea, even among like historians who are not interested in astrology at all, is that the life cycle of an empire tends to be about 250 years, which is interesting because that lines up with the Pluto thing. So Pluto is now moved into Aquarius. So he's moved into Aquarius for good. He moved into Aquarius in January. He went back and forth a bit over the past 2 years between Aquarius and Capricorn, but we're now fully in that Pluto and Aquarius era. And Pluto is a planet that rules things like power. It's like who has power, how power is sort of transmitted during those time frames. It's also about how power is corrupted, who's misusing their power and how that power has been abused, who's abusing their power. And Pluto brings slow change to things. It brings transformation. Once Pluto's changed something, it's not going back, right? And so we went from the Capricorn era, where Pluto in Capricorn was very much about big business and government. And that was the time of, like, he went in 2008, and that was the financial collapse. And it showed how banks and big business and, government had really abused their power and used structures to abuse their power, use banks and use rules and laws to abuse that power. Well, now we're going into Pluto and Aquarius. Aquarius has associations with technology. And so now we're seeing how these big tech bros, we have, these oligarchs that are, we have the Jeff Bezos and the Mark Zuckerbergs and Elon Musks who are abusing their power. They have enormous wealth because of technology. And so we're starting to see how their power is being abused at this point, right? So we have that Pluto and Aquarius theme going on right now. Because Pluto, you can see as plutocrats, like those who are in power because of all the money that they have. So we have that going on. But what's hopeful about that is Pluto and Aquarius is associated with revolutions. So last time Pluto was in Aquarius, we had it was the end of the American Revolution. We had that kind of going on, and the new form of government. This is the era of the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution. The French Revolution happened partly because of the American Revolution. So a lot of, it really annoys me, I have to say, when I see Americans putting France down, because without France, you wouldn't have America, because France provided so much military and naval support during the American Revolution. And that's why France gave the Statue of Liberty to America. It was like, we have shared values, right? So anyway, and then because of all the money they spent, it ended up sort of bankrupting France. They also had a drought as well. So people were starving. The money was spent, and you had the rich, the very rich, throwing lavish parties and, living these opulent lifestyles. Well, the rest of the people were like, hey, I can't afford bread or eggs. Sound familiar? So it's showing that, like, there is this potential to change things. Like, we're only at the start of Pluto in Aquarius. We've got, like, Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for the next 20 years. So we're only at the beginning of this road. Don't let that, despair you. But it's showing there is the potential to change things, to have, to put change in. We also had, like, the Haitian Revolution, where we had people who were, like, enslaved in horrid, terrible conditions rise up against the people who were enslaving them and overthrow them, right? So, there is this idea of revolution, of fighting back, of, like, the will of the people, because Aquarius is also a sign that is about humanity. It's a sign that is about the collective and the collective taking power. So I don't want you to think like, oh no, end of the American Empire. There have been countries who've gone through lots of different Pluto returns, and it has changed the way their government is, or it has changed the way the system is, but they still continue to survive, and they still continue to, be a part of the world. It's just, it's changed in a new form. Like, you think of, like, England, for example, it's gone through a ton of Pluto returns, and still around, still a powerful country, right? So it does not mean end of the United States. It just means, I think, that things may look very different by the time we get to the end of that Pluto in Aquarius, and we go into Pluto in the sign of Pisces in 20 years. So, yes, it is right now, things are not looking great, but we're not at the end of that particular story. So I want people to have hope for that. Pluto in Aquarius also often is like technological revolutions, because again, Aquarius has associations with technology. And so Pluto in Aquarius can see that it can be a time when technology goes through a lot of rapid changes. And we see things, the glimmers of that, I think, the start of that with things like AI, which can be like, it's a little, honestly, like, I find AI a little scary and I don't really like it. But we'll see, where that goes. The technology could go in a different direction that we may not have even thought of at this particular point. But often Pluto in Aquarius times are where technology really kind of has a huge influence on readjusting society. We had the Industrial Revolution during, like, the 1770s and 80s really starting to take off. The time before that was in the 1500s, and we had things like the printing press really, opening up reading and knowledge to people more. So there can be some really good things that come out of that Pluto in Aquarius. The next thing I was going to talk about was Neptune in Aries. So Neptune takes 165 years to go all the way around. Spends about 14 years in the sign, and Neptune just went into Aries at the end of last month. Now we have a little preview right now because Neptune's going to retrograde back into Pisces in October, but then in January of 2026, he's going to move back into Aries for good. One thing I wanted to touch on too, sorry, before I go into Neptune, is Pluto. I wanted to talk about the American birth chart. So A lot of astrologers use what's called the Sibley chart. It is a chart, birth chart for America, that uses the Declaration of Independence as the moment of birth for the modern United States, right? And so the United States is considered to be a Sagittarius rising. So it's got like the sun sign is Cancer, but it's Sagittarius is its rising sign. And so we use that to know what houses, these different planets fall in. And so Pluto, if you don't know what houses are, you take that wheel of the zodiac, which looks like a circle, and you divide it into 12 pieces of pie. Each of those pieces represents a different aspect, like if it's of a person, of their life, but if it's country, an aspect of the country. So Pluto in Aquarius, we've got a Sagittarius rising. Pluto, when it went into Capricorn in 2008, this was about finances. And we saw like financial collapse. We saw, banking collapse. It was all about finances and really transforming the money of the country. Now it's in the third house, and that is about communication. That is about how you communicate with the world. It also has to do with neighbors, right? And right now we're seeing that, there's been this conflict with Canada and Mexico, who are neighbors of the United States. So it's changing the way it relates to neighbors, the way it communicates. Also short distance travel. There may be some changes to travel within the United States as well. Hopefully not in a bad way, but there may be some internal barriers going on, or, that may happen during this time. Okay, so back to Neptune. Sorry, I just thought I'd mention that. So Neptune's gone into Aries, and the last time Neptune was in Aries was the 1860s. And if we look at the history of the United States, the 1860s is the Civil War. So we have this echo of the Civil War. And Neptune is our collective dream. It is what we imagine, we think of as our ideals. When it was in Pisces, some people have considered this kind of the woke era. I mean, I know people misuse that word, right? But Pisces is all about empathy and oneness, and all of us being one and together, and about feelings and emotions, all of those things. Well, now it goes into Aries, and the ideal can be around, and if we look at clues to the past, we look at the 1860s, you had like the glorification of like the soldier, right? This idealization of war. And we may see some of that again, unfortunately. You also have like the idealization of like the cowboy and the pioneer, this sort of in the collective imagination of the United States, right? And so we may see some of that again, where it's like, wanting to explore things, wanting to do new things, but also this sort of more aggressive energy. But often what happens with anytime Neptune is in a sign is it starts off very idealistic, with good intentions, and then quickly you start to see where it goes overboard, or where it may not be grounded in reality, or it might be like just like too idealistic and not very practical, right? And that's in any sign of when Neptune goes in. So we're at the beginning of that, and we see sort of, we're already starting to see a negative side in this sort of like bro culture where, nothing wrong with masculinity. Like there's masculinity and femininity, like they're both positive things, right? They're both good. But if it's when things kind of tip too far, where you have this sort of like this whole manosphere, which is very like female hating, you have this kind of like energy around like men should be in charge of everything, nobody else matters. And usually it's, let's face it, it's usually white men, right, that have to be in charge of things in their little view of the world, right? Like gross. But it's like, it's this idea of like, I'm an individual and I can do it by myself and nobody else matters. And, you even have these Christian nationalists saying that empathy is bad. Kindness is bad. It was so weird, right? But that's part of that Neptune and Aries over idealization of these things. And again, we're at the beginning of this. So I'm not saying, and again, I don't want people to like lose hope or anything. It just means that like we're going to be dealing with some of these ideas and themes for a while. But I find Neptune and Pisces, as it goes on, it often becomes clearer how some of these idealisms, there's not a lot of nuance, and it shows kind of the cracks, right? So Neptune and Aries, we may see this idealization of sort of the adventurer, the idealization of sports as well. Aries is a very sporty type sign. We may see the idealization of pioneers and exploring and going out and discovering new worlds and all that. And we kind of see that already a little bit in some of that, like that going to space, sending rich people to space, that stuff. So we may see more of that because let's face it, a lot of like the 19th century explorers were like, rich guys who were able to like, get enough money to go do these things, right? And so we're going to see a little bit more of that. So we do see that. And in context of the United States, I think that you do see again this sort of this going back to this idea of manifest destiny, this idea of exceptionalism, this idea of like we have the right to take things over. And you see that in the rhetoric of like, we're going to take Greenland, we're going to take Canada and all this stuff, right? But it's going back to some of those, ideals. And interestingly, though, is the Canadian chart. When I look at the chart for Canada, Canada became a country, like, modern country of Canada in 1867. So in the 1860s, and we are in Aries rising. So Neptune is in our first house. And what we're seeing is that this threat to Canada has really brought people together. This is the very first house for us. It's our identity. It's our sense of self, right? And so there is this sort of collective, like, idea of like, this patriotism. There's a lot of like sort of coming up again. And I think, if I look at the chart for Canada, it's really telling us like we need to kind of look at our identity and what our ideals are and who we are. So I think that's interesting. So there's shades of that going on as well. So then we also have coming up in July, we're going to have Uranus go from Taurus into the sign of Gemini. Now, again, Uranus, very slow moving planet. Again, I did this again before. Neptune in Aries is in the 4th house for the United States. Let me think about that. Saturn. No, it's in the 5th house. Yes, it's in the 5th house. So that is creativity in children. And I thought it was interesting that measles has come back because that's, it's 3 children so far, I think, that have died. It's 5th house associated with children, and Neptune sometimes associated with diseases that spread. They're sometimes associated with viruses. And so we may see a resurgence of childhood diseases, which is very troubling and concerning. I think also we may see in the collective culture, because 5th house is creativity, more of this sort of idealization of like the hero, the leader, the hero that saves things, more idealization perhaps of war, cowboy culture, that kind of thing. So just a heads up about that. But back to Uranus, going into Gemini. Uranus was in Gemini last during the Second World War, before that the Civil War. So we now have 2 echoes of the Civil War. And also during the Revolution. So we have now 2 echoes of the American Revolution as well. And Uranus is about technology. Uranus is about things that suddenly happen. Whereas Pluto is slow change over time, Uranus is sudden change, things that just happen out of nowhere, right? Or these big breakthroughs in technology and in science. And we had a lot of, because Gemini's communication, we had a lot of communication breakthroughs and transportation breakthroughs during these times. So we had in the 40s, obviously we had things like TV and radar come up. The car became more accessible to people as well after that. And then we have, in the 1860s, this is when trains really started to become a thing. I mean, they were before, but it really started to take off. We also had things like the Pony Express, like for mail. We also had, there was like technology took a leap forward during this time. And then again, of course, if you look back to the American Revolution, this also coincided with like there was the Industrial Revolution. So we have like technological advancements because unfortunately with war often leads to technological advancements. And we're seeing that kind of like with things like drones, they are becoming more of a thing. I think that's part of that too. So we're going to see some breakthroughs with technology as well. So I don't want to frighten people because there is these sort of echoes from both the Civil War and the Revolution that's happening. But it does look like there are things that are changing. There is like a lot of change that's going to be happening over this year and next year as well, 2026, with these energies that are going on. Now that Uranus in Gemini, Gemini is the 7th house for the United States, which is partnerships. So how it deals with other parts of the world. And it's interesting that when Uranus has been in Gemini, it's either an internal or external conflict. And so it'll be interesting to see how that sort of plays out, on what kind of that conflict looks like. And that conflict may not be overt either. It could be like more of a Cold War type situation or more of a culture kind of situation. Let's hope. I mean, I want peace for everybody. Let's face it, right? But I do see that this is where this energy is kind of flowing to. But there is some hope, because next year we do have what's called like a basket formation, where there are the planets like um, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus are all going to be making for the next while harmonious aspects to each other. So Pluto's in Aquarius, and he's going to be making a sextile that's 60 degrees. It's a harmonious aspect with Neptune and Aries. So you have them working together. And then you have Pluto also making a trine, which is another very harmonious aspect with Uranus and Gemini, because they're going to be both in air signs. So, and then Uranus and Neptune are in sextile. So they're all working together in this harmonious little triangle where it's like all of these big changes are trying to push us all collectively, not just the United States, but all of us, towards better things, towards changes that are for the better. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be painful in the process, though. And then we're going to have Saturn join up with Neptune in Aries. And that's going to happen this spring, but it's not going to go exact. Like, they're not going to be exactly together till next year in 2026. Now, Saturn can join Neptune. Saturn's about rules, structures, boundaries, and Neptune dissolves things. Neptune's about ideals. Neptune's about the collective. It's about the ocean. It dissolves things. And that happens every 36 years. And the last time Neptune and Saturn met up, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall. We had the Soviet Union falling apart. Often things we thought were stable and solid and always going to be there just kind of dissipate. They just go away. They just dissipate. And in that, there is going to be an opportunity, I think, for positive change. Something's going to dissolve. Something's going to not be there anymore. And there's going to be an opportunity to remake things in a better way. And so I think that's, my message is to try to hold out hope for that. I think also that Neptune and Saturn alignment often affects Russia. And so we had like Soviet Union fell. The time before that was 1953 when Stalin died. The time before that was the Russian Revolution. The time before that, there was a Tsar that was assassinated. So there's like a lot of changes with Russia. So there may be some influence from that as well. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, right? I'm not going to say, one way or the, but like, I don't know. But I know that there is something that's going to probably happen with Russia and China during that time. But it looks like there's an opportunity for us, especially in the spring of next year, to make things better for everyone. And so I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but what I'm seeing is that these outer planets, with these changes in technology, changes in what our ideals are, changes in how power is distributed, they're working together over the next several years to try to bring opportunities to us to change things for the better. So I think it's important to hold on to those hopes, even amongst all of this other stuff that's going on. I just might say, wherever you are in the world, I'm sending you so much love. To my American friends, I feel for you. I'm sending you so much love. I feel so worried about people in the United States. Well, really everybody. Like, I was like, especially if you're a woman, if, you're part of the queer community, if, you're part of like a minority group, if you're immigrant, all those things. But really, like, if you're not a rich billionaire, like, all this stuff going on, we're in trouble, right? Like, and so I think it's important that we all got to stick together and take care of each other. I know here in Canada, we're rooting for you. And also we're like, we don't want to be annexed. We don't want any of that stuff coming our way. Also, shout out to my Mexican friends as well, because, all these tariff stuff, we feel it as well. We feel for you. So sending love wherever you are in the world. I am sending you so much love. If you have any questions or any thoughts about any of the astrology, please put down below. If you want to hear more of these type things, let me know. I'd love to, love to talk about this stuff. But let me know what your thoughts are. Just if you're worried, like all of the stuff, like let's stick together. And as always, I'm sending you all so much peace for everybody in the world, and love. And rock.